Good evening, everybody. My name is Joaquin Ruiz. I'm the Dean of the College of Science, and I welcome you all to the next Living and Beyond lecture. Today we're talking about transplants and organ regeneration. So I would like to thank, as we do in each one of these lectures, our underwriters, which allow us all to produce this extraordinary lecture series and allows us to do it for free. And it's the Arizona Center on Aging, the Arizona Daily Star, Cox Communication, Galileo Circle, Godot Design, Bob Davis of Innovation Park, Raytheon, Research Corporation, Sanofi US, the Marshall Foundation, Unisource Energy, and Ventana Medical Systems. Thank you very much for your support. Now, today I have the double pleasure of introducing the speaker who will wow you, I'm sure, with an amazing lecture, but he's also my neighbor. Do you want to hear about my neighbor? Actually, he's a great neighbor, but he's leaving, and it has nothing to do with us, I don't think. So David Armstrong is our lecturer today, and it says in here that he's a podiatric surgeon, but in fact, he is an anti-surgeon. And the reason he's an anti-surgeon is because he's widely known for his work in amputation prevention, the diabetic foot and wound healing. He's a professor of surgery here at the U of A and a co-founder of the Southern Arizona Limb Salvage Alliance, also known as SALSA. You could only have such a thing here in Tucson. An internationally renowned center for diabetic wound treatment and amputation prevention. He holds a Master's of Science in Tissue Repair and Wound Healing from the University of Wales College of Medicine and a PhD from the University of Manchester College of Medicine. David has published many of the key works in the field of amputation prevention that have spanned an astonishing array of topics, including epidemiology, vascular and infectious diseases, wound healing, neurology, classification and team building, biomechanics, biology, and limb salvage surgery. And he gave me this last part because he's modest. He's the youngest ever member elected into the Podiatric Medicine Hall of Fame. Please welcome our distinguished lecturer.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Joaquin. And Joaquin, will you be my Valentine? Actually, no. I want to acknowledge my Valentine, Tanya, Valentine of 20-something years now. A little bit less in marriage, but honey, I love you. And girls, and my mother-in-law as well, my Valentine. You're here as well. Astonishing. Something edible. And Bernadette as well. But it's really a pleasure to be here. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't think, and by the way, what the heck are you doing here on Valentine's Day? This is astonishing group. You're so fortified, and with the weather, you know. But truly, I'd like to thank, I think, Bo Baylor and Joaquin Ruiz, who have put this thing on, and I don't think we give them enough thanks. And what a difference this makes, really translating science and into something of an art. And ladies and gentlemen, let's give Joaquin a round of applause. But I was thinking about how to get this whole shindig started, and I was told that you're supposed to, that you're supposed to go to, you know, that sort of someone intelligent, and I can't think of more of the epitome of intelligence than this guy. I mean, he's got all the characteristics. He's got the books in the background, which I think clearly, you were with me, and the devil may care kind of hair thing. What else? Oh, the puppy eyes. But there's like a ferocity kind of thing going on there too. It's a little intimidating. But I didn't. I'm getting slap happy already. I didn't actually take advice from Joaquin, remarkably. Although I should have. I took advice actually from another man, not a scientist, but a dandy, if you will, this man, when we're talking about prediction, and in some ways when we're talking about humility and perspective. And he put it into perspective in The Importance of Being Earnest. And he said that if we're looking to the future, prediction is always difficult, especially when it concerns the future. And so if we're going to do this together, I think we have to have some element of humility rather than hubris in this area. We'll talk about that in a minute as we try to discuss this whole shindig. And if we look at kind of the big picture about what we're going to discuss, it's all of this. And the first thing we're going to ask ourselves is, why is this important? And assuming that we can convince one another this is an important problem, aging and what's coming next, non-communicable diseases, and you're going to hear a lot more from Professor Vinny Del Casino, one of the best names, I think, for a professor on campus, by the way. And you're going to love his talk. But this is going to be a prequel to that. I'm kind of the pivot person, I think, in this whole thing. And then assuming we can convince one another this is important, the next question we're going to ask ourselves, in 3 parts, is what's here and what's next. The first bit will be on regrowth, replacement, repair. We will talk a bit about transplants, about other things, matrices and stem cells and what's happening there. And we'll have some guests. Bless you. That was a very good sneeze. We'll then move on to hardware upgrades. We're going to talk about sort of the interface in man-machine interfaces and the latest of what's going on in that area in our unit and other places around the country and indeed around the world. And then finally, we'll talk about optional extras and apps, kind of like a human app store, if you will, and the merger of all of this with us and what makes us us. I think that's what we're going to discuss. So, and then we'll try to put it all together in some sort of grand unifying theory, if that's possible. But before we try to embark on this, as I said, I think we need a little bit. There's a lot of hubris in a lot of things, and particularly in medicine, and particularly in surgery. But I have no problem with the humility bit, and I always tell my trainees that in this coefficient of humility and hubris, you ought to err on the former rather than on the latter. I think it'll hold you in better stead. And I don't have any problem in doing that because this is what I do. I tend to people's legs and try to keep them on people's bodies, particularly ones that have very bad wounds. And I love my job. I think I'm the luckiest doctor in the world, but I can't think of another way to, forgive me for not articulating this well, but I can't think of another way to articulate respect and humility, something that's so well conserved throughout the ages, than tending to someone like this. And my dad used to teach me, and I grew up in his office, and that folks don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care. And I don't think we talk about that enough in medicine. But with that, it also offers us a really great gift of perspective, because at the end of the body, on any extremity, we're sort of hostage to everything that comes down from the north. And so it affords us a great view of everything else, because we are, again, at the beck and call of everything else that's coming from there, be it neurological, vascular, dermatological, and other. So with that, a little bit of perspective and perhaps a little bit of prediction with some humility, maybe we can have some prologue. And that, I can't think of someone else other than Joaquin to give us some prologue than this man. Now, like Joaquin, he will occasionally wear a turtleneck, and he wears it off very well as well, a little more receding hairline. But this is none other than Auguste Comte. And Comte was a philosopher of 250 years ago. And pardon me. And what he talked about back then, and it translates so beautifully from the French, is just as apropos today. He said that demography is destiny. Now, that may not mean much to you now, but maybe it will in a bit, and particularly after you hear good Professor Del Casino talk about it. But we're really headed for a major league awakening with demography if we just look at this world map. Now, this is a map from the folks at Gapminder, and it's It's not like any other map. It's a couple of years old, so it's pretty new. But instead of the north, south, east, and west, this map has healthy, sick, rich, poor on the cardinal axes. And so if we look at this, we can see all the nations of the world, the different colors based on the different regions. But what we're seeing is a bubbling up of humanity into folks that are living longer and getting slightly, marginally wealthier. And as that's happening, we're seeing these big bubbles that are going to ultimately bump into our bubbles up here in the West and probably change our kind of Western-centric view of the world in many ways. And I think we should be ready for that. And I don't think it's good. I don't think it's bad. I just think it is what it is. I think there's a lot of promise there. But if we're going to try to do this, maybe we have to think about what actually happened just a couple of years ago. Now, in 2009, we were mired in this sort of economic funk, as it were. Maybe still are. But I don't think any of us realized what actually happened in 2009, probably much more important than this most recent Great Recession. And it was this, that for the first time in the history of us, more people in 2009 died of non-infectious diseases, non-communicable diseases, NCDs, if you will, than they did from infectious diseases. First time ever. The line was crossed. And this is a major league issue. So things like diabetes, heart disease, cancer, stroke, lung disease overtook many of the things that you think about all the time when you think of things that are killing people all over the world and that we're dealing with. And if we look here, we see just in a microcosm, although not much of a microcosm, diabetes. If we compare diabetes to AIDS and HIV, diabetes passed HIV/AIDS that very, very same year. In fact, in that very same study, in that very same month. So lines have been crossed. It's not just in the developed world. 80% of the deaths, about 35 to 40 million deaths that occur each year now from non-communicable diseases, occurred in the developing world. So this is a problem that is worldwide, as it were. And maybe it should give us a bit of a new worldview before we get on to our strategies to try to fight it. And this is actually a terrific, and if not a slightly odd way of looking at the ages of humans. And instead of looking at the way they lived, Steve Jones, who sits on the UK Stem Cell Foundation, he's a great guy and is a bit of a science pundit. He talked about the 3 ways that we died throughout the ages, throughout the eons. So the first way we died for 95% of our existence was this way, was disaster. We died of getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or falling off a precipice, or falling off a precipice, getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, things like this. And I knew this wasn't historically accurate. I asked Ruiz about this on our driveway, and he told me, well, he's a geologist. He should know about all. Anyway, but the fact of the matter is, thankfully, whether we're running from a Tyrannosaurus or not, we got smart, and we banded together in communities, thank goodness, and sort of circled our wagons, if you will, and hunter-gatherers to agrarians, and we stopped dying so much of the saber-toothed tigers and the disaster, and we started dying of this, of disease. Plague, Yersinia pestis, Vibrio cholera, dengue fever, malaria, you name it. But as you saw, what's happened in 2009 is that a line has been crossed. And you've already seen some of these from the terrific talks that have already come, and from Shane's and Carol's, but also Yanko's, that showed that we have really done a wonderful job in terms of public health in controlling disease throughout the world, although, my goodness, we certainly do have our epidemics from time to time. But we're moving out of this era of just disease and moving into this, to an era of decay, and to where we're dealing now with these non-communicable diseases, this sinister, slow, inexorable sort of path toward death. And this is sort of maybe an interesting worldview to take, and I think we have to have ourselves a sort of a game plan. So if logically, within reason, and you're going to hear for and against on this, I think, from Vinny next week. The richer we are, the longer we live, within reason, within strata. But we can also agree, I think, entirely that quantity might not equal quality. I think you've already heard that in the superb 3 talks already that have come before. But what we also know is that the costs associated with decay pose a serious calamity, not just for all of us personally, but fiscally. We're talking $47 trillion between now and 2030, and based on the most recent World Economic Forum data from Eva Jane Lopez and others. And I know a trillion is a new billion now, but it's still a lot. And so with that, I think we have to have ourselves some strategies together. And I can think of maybe a few strategies to try to fight decay, or at least to deal with it in some way. One way that's kind of comforting, to me at least, would be just to say, okay, to decay. I mean, why not? It's the entropy is sort of the order of the universe, isn't it? It's what it is, and it's the natural course of things, and it's probably okay to just say okay to decay. So that's one thing that we can do. And there's something that feels good about that to some, and in some ways to me as well. But if we're not going to do that, you might say we can disobey decay. And that perhaps is another way to do that. It's just that when when I hear people talking about disobeying something, things seem more hubristic rather than humble, seeming like we have all the answers, which we don't even know all the questions. And so this, to me, is a strategy, I guess, but maybe a little too hubristic. So with that, maybe we can do this third strategy and maybe delay decay, as I said. And maybe this has a little more potential because it suggests we don't have all the answers. Maybe together, if we look outside of just medicine and other areas in science and industry, we can probably come up with some strategies to make a difference. And so if we're going to do that, to delay decay, let's tour Tomorrowland today. And with that, let's have 3 stops on our tour of Tomorrowland. These 3 stops that we're going to have in Disney fashion are first the regrowth and the regeneration and repair, second, some of the man-machine interfaces, as it were, and third, these optional extras and apps. That's what we're going to talk about now through the end. And so let's buckle up for that. So first, on regrowth, replacement, and repair, and there's so much in this area that I want to talk about. We don't have time, but I very much would love to get into this. But we are getting into this replacement renaissance, or renaissance, Dr. Ruiz. And with that, one of the first things that captures our imagination is a transplant. I mean, to hold an organ in your hand and then take it from one person who's given it all and give it to someone else, and it's extraordinary. And it happens every day, but it's still no less extraordinary. But we can divide these into 3 sorts of types of transplants just for the purposes of discussion. It's not, and just for that. They are the traditional, but they're anything but traditional. Things like heart, kidney, lung, liver, intestine now, pancreas, and bone marrow transplants. These are things that we think about very frequently now at units like right over here at UMC, right under Speedway. And then another thing that's also going on at UMC are these we would call novel sorts of transplants. These are cellular transplants. We're going to meet someone that does those for a living. He's, I think, pounding Red Bull and cappuccino backstage right now. Just you'll have to bear with him. There's, but this is very, very exciting. The thing that most people think about with this are things like islet cell transplants for the islets of Langerhans and the pancreas. I'm pointing to the pancreas, to treat type 1 diabetes is something that captures the imagination, but also for certain neurologic diseases. And the third are these composite tissue transplants. That means taking an entire part, a face, a hand, a leg, things like this, and actually replanting it or taking it from one person and giving it to another. This really captures the imagination. But I say new, and that in and of itself is a little bit kind of too big for our britches, because it's not new. What's old is new, and we can take a tour of the past here. And many of you that know your Catholic history, particularly from Eastern Orthodox, know from this story from Constantinople, straight out of Constantinople. And this is the miracle of the black leg. And let's look at these players, because it informs us on the players that you're going to meet momentarily. But we have two surgeons. They're co-surgeons. We have Saints Cosmas and it's Damien, and they were both surgeons. They were saints. They were twins, and they were doctors. And I'm thinking their mom must have been so proud of them. I mean, how can you? I mean, anyway, enough. I'm going to get in trouble. We don't have time for being slide. But the point is, this is, I mean, an amazing story, because I think it captured the imagination and informed us on what is really, really possible. But these are the other two people. This is Justinian, who's a Roman deacon living in Constantinople, and this is a donor from, they called it an Ethiopian donor, but he gave so much, like people do today, for transplants every day, and there just aren't enough people doing that. We then also have our staff in the operating theater. We have, and these are the circulators and the technicians looking on, making sure everything's going okay, really running the show. And then you have the anesthesiologist kind of looking on, looking up, and making sure everything's right. But this is it. I mean, it's amazing. This is 1,700 years ago. And now this is something that could just happen right across the street. And this is Warren Breidenbach heroically doing the first hand transplants that were successful. And now you see the whole team. You see the two circulators, just like in the Justinian Damien. You got no kidding. There's not no twins here or anything, but maybe I'm thinking fraternal here. And then still working on the southpaw. Look at that. God dang. And that is just, how can that not? But this, so from that to this is Matt Scott. And this is Matt Scott. He's unfortunately a Phillies fan, but this is Matt throwing out the first pitch with the Philly Fanatic. And he's not back at 66 feet and 6 inches, as you can see. It's 45 for him, but I think we can cut him a little slack. He hasn't even had the dang stitches out. And look at this. This is just, I mean, isn't that great? And while Matt can't be here, Warren can, from our very own Department of Surgery. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend Warren Breidenbach. But I'm telling you, it's just, you can't even, words don't describe, but those are the kinds of things that are really just magical in medicine, and they make you want to get up in the morning. But the all-in-one team really is now, and this is evolving thanks to folks like Warren and someone else you're going to meet as well. But I think where we have all of these three things on one team is going to be very, very important. And we have it here. I think we're the only public university medical school in the country to have all three of these sorts of categories in one place. But this actually is probably going to get less and less unique, thankfully. But there's going to be more and more advances like what you're seeing, sort of pushing the envelope. The trouble is that we're running up again against numbers and demography. And we have to advance because there are only 28,000 transplants every year. Now, half of them are from redundant organs like the kidney, 25% from the liver, and 25% other, some of the exotica, like you saw with composite tissue like faces and arms and others that you saw Warren doing and team. But so we have to have other strategies. And to do that, we have to try to create things ourselves, or at least coax tissues to do that. And that leads us to really two things: stem cells and the place stem cells call home, matrices. Not like a Keanu Reeves matrix, but like, it's Valentine's Day, you guys are here. If we're talking about stem cells, we can divide them roughly, and we don't have time to dig so deep into this, but this is such a wonderful area, and there's so much happening. I'll even show you a study from today, from just an hour ago, that just came out in the Lancet. But there's, you can divide them into embryonic stem cells, so-called totipotent cells. It's very alliterative, and then adult stem cells. Now, embryonic stem cells are just like kids. They're full of vim and vigor. They don't know what they can and can't do. They can become anything. They've unlimited potential. The trouble is that sometimes we have to rein them in, just like kids, and they can become tumorigenic if they get a little too frisky. And there are, of course, still a lot of ethical issues associated with embryonic stem cell research and embryonic stem cell lines. So we can then go to the more world-weary adult stem cells. Now, but there's great promise with them as well. Sure, they've been there and done that. They can't become as much as the totipotent cells as you were, but we can divide these into where they come from. Hematopoietic stem cells and mesenchymal stem cells are things that we use very, very frequently in our unit in SALSA, but the most common places that we can derive them and then amplify them are from the bone marrow and from adipose tissue. And these are, but there are other tissues, of course, as well, as you're going to see in a moment, where you can take them from now and actually really make a significant difference in healing this area. But this is an example. This wasn't too graphic, so I didn't warn you about it. I will warn you if there's something really, really graphic. And if you do fall or faint in the aisleway, put your hand up so I can take your picture. So you'll tweet it. So this is us. This is a wonderful man who has a big foot, as you can see. But he burned all of the bottom of his foot off walking on a hot deck because he didn't have the gift of pain, and he was slated for an amputation. He was not too keen on that, and nor were we in this case. And so we actually pulled some cells from the marrow. These were then taken and amplified. And then we delivered those ultimately to his wound. We'll look at an example of that, maybe not as graphic as what you would see under here, but something like that in a moment. But the thing is, with stem cells, you need something else, usually, when you're delivering them to something. They need a place to call home, and therefore, you need to actually create that matrix. And what if you could weave it, or print it as well? That's another thing that can be done. But what if you could weave an organ like Charlotte would weave a web? And wouldn't that be great? And we have our very own Charlotte here at our university, at the University of Arizona, and she's a he and has fewer arms, maybe more facial hair, and it's my longtime friend, Professor Horacio Rilo. Horacio, how are you? So
they were changing the batteries on the microphone shortly before. So
oh, they were. Are you good? Oh,
good.
And you look good too, with the matching with this. So let's look. So this is Horacio. We were actually going to do this in backstage, but we couldn't because it created too many fumes. No kidding, and they wouldn't let us. So let's see what we've got. Let me get over here and control this actually. So Horacio, can you show us what we have? What's going on here? Let me take us back. So this is a chamber. It looks like a magician's kind of chamber, and there's magic that's going on here, right?
Yeah, we actually.
And you have George doing that.
It's a homemade electro-spinning machine.
So you're electro-spinning this, and that's what we're doing here. So as you look here, if you look down there, you'll see a little pink. There's a little a little device there with a needle on it. Isn't so?
Yes.
So what's that?
There is a high energy source that will deliver energy to the needle and will create an arch with a holding plate. So
right. And
a polymer in case of collagen or gelatin or a mixed other polymers will generate this weave that then you can extract and seed with stem cells or native cells. And we actually build that. It's kind of a homemade device.
So
it works well.
This is really, I think most of these, by the way, are homemade. There aren't too many of these that you can call them. But look what's happening here. I don't know if you can see this now, but do you see it looks like a web? And there you are, like Quentin Tarantino movie, walking down with the no, you don't, not at all. And now you can actually take that web. We'll look at a picture of it up close in a minute. But you actually take those and put them into a cassette, right?
Yes.
And then
in a bioreactor, and you can circulate fluids or growth factors,
and then we can
develop artificial organs.
And so one of the thing that's for us, thankfully.
I bring you one as a present here.
Oh, you have?
Yeah. You can open it.
Okay.
In case you needed extra skin.
I just thought that
for one of your patients.
You know, Don Cornelius just died, and he used to say, you know, give me some skin. And let's see here. That's a. Oh, this is awesome. So you should hold this. This is you, man. This is like a doily of tissue. It's and it really is wonderful. And here, can I keep it?
Yeah, sure.
Good. This is great. So this is great. I know you can't all see this, but just hallucinate with me. This is extremely terrific. And what one can do now is one can actually take this and seed that with someone's own cells or something else, actually. And if there's appropriate cell signaling, and that has a bit to do with gene therapy as well. But if there's appropriate cell signaling, then you can actually regrow rather complicated parts. Initially simple, but then more complicated. Correct. Let's look at an example. I just showed. This is. I'll just show you here. So tell me, what are these then?
So those are circles of aluminum. Actually,
right.
It's aluminum foil that we have cut it with a craft machine, you know, to perfectly cut a circle.
So you should see Horacio's lab. His lab is like, you know, you'd think there's no such thing as mad scientists. And I've been in a lot of labs, and labs take on the personality of the people that are running it, sort of the cult of personality. And Horacio's is like, there's a little bit of, it's unbelievable. And this is one of these toys.
So basically what you can do for patients that are burned, and I work at the Children's Hospital in Cincinnati, at Shriners, and we see kids with 90% burn, so there is no skin, no donor skin, so you need to come out with new strategies, because if not, those kids are going to die. And so basically what you can do is seed that with keratinocyte or fibroblasts and create like artificial skin, and then implant them in the areas of burn.
Right. And let's just show an example now. This is a little bit graphic, but it's not that bad. I took the smallest wound that I could find from that we have kind of in our clinic. But this is an example. It's a wonderful lady, and she had a wound for, this was a number of years. It was something less than 10 years. I think it was 8 years that she had this wound. And it was like a part of her family. I mean, and she was treated like a modern-day leper, if you can try to imagine this. It's very difficult to explain this, but this was after we had surgically debrided it or trimmed away some of the dead tissue. And then we applied a very, very similar technology to this. No cells in there just yet, but then this matrix we then spiked with the person's own cells. And you can't see this very well, but you just work with me here. It's really exciting, at least to those of us that are doing this, because you can see these little fields of capillaries or capillaries coming in. That sounds much more British. If you do it that way, it's much more erudite. But you see this. I mean, these are just growing in, and she is literally regenerating. And you see this now. This is only 3 weeks. And then finally, in 42 days, double that, she's regenerated her skin. And this is a very small wound, but this meant a lot to her in her life. But we have a lot of people that have no skin on an entire extremity, where with the right amount of patience on both of our parts, I think we can make a difference. And it's thanks to guys like Don Horacio. Hey, can you stick around later? Can you stick around later? Hang out backstage. There's a cappuccino machine for you.
Thank you.
Courtesy of, it's free, College of Science. Okay, so let's go on. I'm sorry if we're taking time. I'll hustle. But just today, this study just came out in the Lancet from colleagues of ours at Cedars-Sinai, and now this was a different matrix, not the skin, but there's so many similarities, and so much of this is well conserved. But the heart, the myocardium, so this is muscle. But these investigators and clinicians, a series of them at Cedars, took myocardium. They then took that tissue, and then they extracted the stem cells from that. These are hematopoietic and stem cells from that. And then they amplified them, and they delivered it back to the heart of people that have had a heart attack about a month after they had a heart attack. And remarkably, this is a very small study, but potentially important, because they delivered it through endovascularly. And what they found through the artery in the heart was that there was increased cardiac contractility and cardiac function based on a whole host of invasive and non-invasive tests in the group that actually got the stem cells. So very, very interesting, very promising. And this is very interesting because some of the heart had already been destroyed, and the surgeons did not have to cut out any of that heart and put a matrix on it. They actually did it without the matrix, so which is odd, and I just don't entirely understand it because it requires a great deal of remodeling. But it happened, and I think we have to get down to that matrix remodeling and try to understand that. But it is really extremely exciting, and so this is the next step, really. Maybe we can. Oh yeah, that's I just did that this morning. It's a little, but what if we could have instead of a couple? What if we could have 3 folks that come together and make music together? Not only the matrix, the acellular bit, but the stem cell that's following the path laid by the matrix, and maybe a gene therapy that's telling them what to do. Then maybe we can make a difference. And the trouble is this is not very well conserved evolutionarily, but there are some vertebrates that can do this. This is a salamander, a newt, if you will, newt, but the point is that if we can teach if we can understand this sort of the embryonic regeneration program that is existing in this extremity, then we may be able to direct therapy specific to certain cassettes of genes and actually turn certain things on, turn certain things off, then put a matrix in place potentially to ease things along. I don't think we're ever going to have a capacity for regeneration like Newt here, or whether a presidential candidate or a salamander. And in case you didn't get what everyone was laughing about, and maybe we can do this. And this is just, man, does this ever capture the imagination? I mean, imagine having Professor Breidenbach on one arm and then the Newt on the other, and you've got this is great. This is so exciting. I don't even want to leave it. But there's a lot more to talk about here about printing things and printing organs, but we can maybe talk about it in the Q&A. The bottom line is that this is the first stop on our tour of Tomorrowland. Let's move on to stop number 2, and that is, if you will, hardware upgrades. And just as before, when we took our first tour, we had a little bit of a stop historically. We can do it here as well in terms of hardware upgrades, but it's not going to be. Well, I'm going to introduce you to someone. I don't know if he's in the audience. Is Dave Rakelin here? Oh, Dave Rakelin. So can you stand up, ladies and gentlemen? Give Dave Rakelin So you have no idea what Dave does, and you gave him a round of applause. But Dave is what's best about this university, because he's an anthropologist, get it? But he works with early modern humans and with primates, and what he's trying to figure out is some of the issues regarding bipedalism, what made us bipedal, and some of the strategies for ambulation that took us from the trees to the ground in the savannah in East Africa back in the day. And to do that, you have to look back, and you can compare it to our different primate cousins, and finally to humans. But just like every good scientist, there's a philosophy to this, I think, and I am oversimplifying this because there are data for and against this, and Dave can speak to that really well. But the bottom line is that an overall goal is sort of elegance in motion, to take the least amount of activity for us to get to calories and to keep ourselves alive. That seems to be fairly well protected. I think there's for and against, but I think that is something that evolutionarily may ultimately become settled at some point. It's a bit controversial now, but it is, I think, more true than false, which speaks to this today. And you look at that and laugh. I look at that and I cry, because what it really is it's our success. I mean, the term is the thrifty gene theory. It's where we've been selected for based on our ability to put on calories in the lean times. We don't have time to talk about this, but this is what's led. Look, if you don't have to walk very far to get to the KFC or the gas and sip or the McDonald's or whatever, this is then we're going to do that. And this is not good. It's not bad. It just is. And I think we have to figure out strategies here. But there's also great strategies for elegance here in how people walk. And I'm fascinated with that, of course. I love watching folks perambulate. And with that, you can take those works from eons in the past, a couple of million years ago, in East Africa, and apply them today to this. And it speaks to that, to elegance and ambulation. And let's look. This is work from Hugh Herr, who's another great guy. Dave, you'd love Hugh. But he's a double amputee, lost it mountain climbing on Mount Washington, unfortunately. But he created his own prosthesis. And look at this thing. This is the iPhone of prosthesis. It's triaxial. It's a triaxial through ankle. I mean, it's just, to me, this is like pornographic. It's so beautiful. But I'm into this, and I know you're not. But it's so elegant. And look, these are two of the first two of the first test pilots here. This is Will Borden. He was, I think, 40 when he first started this. And look at this thing. This is a gait lab, not unlike ours, but you see him walking, and you'll see it in fast. I mean, it's really hard to tell that he even has a prosthetic. And look here. This is Justin Lin, lost it from an IED. He lost his leg from an IED. He worked construction. It's very hard to walk upstairs with a below-knee prosthetic. But look at this. That is crazy. Look at this is. I know this looks like a promotional video, but it's unbelievable. So this man who gave a leg for us now can give it back to his kids. I just think this is the greatest thing. But there's problems here still, and we have to look outside of bioengineering to other people to get answers. Because just like my phone, the battery stinks on this thing. And it only lasts for a couple of hours. So all this is great, but you have to keep recharging it. So it limits things. But that's going to change. Why? Because of advances with phones, the cars we're driving, and many other things. We have to look and try to bring these things together. But another thing that's captured people's imagination, at least my imagination, are these so-called wearable robots are becoming much more, if they're still relatively uncommon, but I think we're going to start to see them much more for all of us. And we'll look at these. This is, and these are like sort of robo-suits. You know, you have the right to remain silent, with RoboCop. But it's remarkable. They have these beefy RoboCop-style names like Hulk and Hal, and it's kind of a Stanley Kubrick kind of, and then E-Legs is a little more less, here's the E-Legs device. This is from Exobionics. They were formerly Berkeley Bionics, and this is a woman. God bless her. She's paraplegic, and she's had this device. She's played with it for only 12 hours, and these are some of the first steps she's ever taken. Now, this may not mean a lot to you, but I think it does to her. And she has, now let's understand, this is really great, but she has a wingman back here, and he's controlling the joystick and moving some of these things and making sure it's moving. So it's still early days with this device, but this thing has really pioneered a lot of bipedalism in people that couldn't do it. We're going to take this another 2 or 3 steps in the next 10 or 15 minutes about strategies to make this different today. Our very own Raytheon here in Tucson, and we have, this is the Sarcos device, and look at this thing, it's unbelievable. Now, I can only lift 200 pounds for maybe 90 minutes myself, back and forth, and then I get a little, I can see you guys agree, but until I get a little bit spent. But this fella, he can go all day. Why? He has this device. Now, does this device, it looks very intimidating and inelegant, but it's not. These things are going to get smaller, and they're going to get smaller faster, and we're going to be able to use them. And here's an application from 2 of these things that look relatively impractical, and they're getting more practical. This is the hybrid assisted limb. It is now for sale in Japan, and this is a nursing home. These are stroke patients. They can still have some motion in their legs, and the way this works is it actually takes a signal from the quadriceps in this case, and then what happens is that signal is then sent to the power pack. It's just like these are like ECG pads that you put on here, EKG pads, and then that powers the device, and then it moves as you move, and so this is really astonishing. But there's more. This device. It's like a Ginsu. There's more. Look, there's actually a full-body version of this device. And here we go. Look at this guy. More of the lifting, the heavy lifting with this. But this looks, it's got lights on there, too. But this is astonishing. And here's the thing. This thing is for sale. You can buy this. This is a brochure for this device that you can buy now. And you could buy it for one of your relatives, or you could buy it if you're an enthusiast. Yeah, I think it's a little weird too, but it's going to get less weird, I promise. And I think things like this may assist us in what we can and can't do today. But one thing is these things have to get smaller, and one thing we've been working on with a group from Boston have been artificial muscles. Now, this is the scaled-up version of that, but these things actually are pneumatic, but we can actually make them from other things. I'll just show you. We have a little strain gauge here that can actually sense, just like a sarcomere in the muscle, when things are supposed to stretch. And quite literally, we can play, like, I don't know if this is too long or if I can show this to you, but it's pretty nifty. We can play like Geppetto, and we can move body parts with these artificial muscles that couldn't be moved before. And we can do that wirelessly, or we can do it based on an action potential from somewhere else. So all of these are really interesting, and they're getting smaller. One way they might get smaller is through intelligent fabrics and intelligent textiles, and this is so-called nano yarn. That sounds great. I don't think you can get that at Joann's Fabrics, but do you have any nano yarn? But this is astonishing. It's the width of a human hair, but it's very, very strong, like you would expect. Something called nano yarn, you'd think it's like super strong too, and it is. But imagine this now woven into something like a collagen-like material, and supporting some of these sinews, if you will, that are artificial, but that we can then power in some fashion. This captured our imagination, and we have to be looking to try to bring these things together, from intelligent textiles to bioengineering, and that's another area that has to happen. But all of this is advancing very quickly. This is a group from Duke called the Walk Again Project, and you can go to their website. Now, they're from Duke, but they've got these Brazilian colors, so they're strange. They're Brazilian North Carolinians, but the bottom line is we don't have to judge them, but what we can do, these are brilliant guys, and this lab is really brilliant, but what they want to try to do is to have the brain control these. We're going to talk about this in a second. And have someone who's a quadriplegic walk out in 2014 to center pitch during the World Cup, during the opening ceremony. We'll see if they can do it. But wouldn't it be cool? I mean, God dang. And so this is, anyway. But one other thing that's been, this isn't too graphic, is it? I can skip. Okay. No one's falling. And if you need to get up, we have a robot for you. This is one of the great victories in life sciences, I think, in southern Arizona, and this was Syncardia from Mark Slepian and Jack Copeland, who started this company with others, and they started basically a bridge to transplant, this device, many years ago. But when it first started, it was literally a lifesaver, but it was very difficult to use. This pack was 418 pounds. I mean, that is pretty darn heavy. That is more than having another wingman behind you. That's having two. But now, that's gotten down in a very short amount of time from this to this. So it's about the size of a bowling ball, kind of a lighter bowling ball, kind of a bantam league bowling ball. So it's really a less of a heavy heart, if you will. And we can thank this again to batteries and battery powered energy, and ultimately maybe even solar power, solar fabrics can be powering many of these products that we thought were way too much of a battery drain. So there's a lot going on in these areas, and that's our hardware upgrades. Now let's finish the last third of our bit. How are we doing? I'll hustle, I promise. With these optional extras and apps. And this is how we'll finish, and then we'll have a little conclusion after this. But this is, again, a really particularly exciting area in a particularly exciting time. Now, there's a movement, if you will, pardon the pun, to quantify, for people to quantify what they're doing on a daily basis. It's called the QS, or the Quantified Self movement, and there are a lot of these enthusiasts in this area like everywhere else, but there are so many things now that one can measure with their phone or with other devices now through apps, as you will. And look at this. I mean, it's just really, it captures the imagination. I mean, from the heart to the lung to body weight to even a baby if you're pregnant, we are beginning to. I always tell our trainees that we can't manage what we can't measure. And we don't do a good job of that in medicine, to be honest. I think we have to measure things better. But we're starting to quantify things, and that's not coming from medicine. It's coming from us collectively as a family, because we want to do it, and we have the gadgets now that can allow us to do it, and maybe you're getting more elegant. We are very much kind of gadgeteers, and one of the things, bless you, one of the things we're fascinated with are these intelligent textiles and smart shirts. And these are devices that were developed at Georgia Tech. We've modified these, and we've ported onto them a device that can measure everything that you're doing in terms of your activity, every position you're in. This is courtesy of Bijan Najafi, who's in our unit, and he's just superb. But we can actually measure all this. And what we're starting to find now is that we can predict when something is going to break down. So just like an airplane, it's most dangerous when it's taking off and landing, and you add up those number of takeoffs and landings. It may not be the steps or the distance that you cover. It may actually be those numbers of takeoffs and landings that may cause an artificial hip to go down, or a knee, or other things. If you are, if you're having trouble walking, we may be able to sense certain things about your regularly irregular balance and activity that could presage, if you will, something bad. So this is exciting. And the data are interesting, and they're getting more and more interesting. And I have a feeling many of us will be using things like this in the very near future, and they will be very inexpensive. So that's that. But there are other companies. This is a little company. All these are startups. This is a company, again, in Boston, who got started up and are interested in diabetes like we are. And they are porting blood glucose measurements into a phone, and they are also putting other things like activity monitoring into the phone. And what they're doing is they're trying to get people to be a bit more healthy. And they're nudging them to that. And if you think about it, or at least if I think about it, and it may not be a good analogy, but work with me. It's like a Prius for your body. You know what I mean? And no, maybe not. But my point, just nod your head and make me feel better. But the point is that this Prius, if any of you have driven one of these, you know, and I've used to have one, and but what it does is it's hectoring you constantly. It's taunting you in a way to be more fuel efficient. And what happens is you become more fuel efficient. And I think people can become more fuel efficient in how they move through. Maybe they'll park a little further away from the mall. Maybe they'll do a few extra things. But this sort of thing now is happening as people are measuring things. And these data can go not only to us, but if we want it to our nurse or our doctor. And this is interesting, but it raises a lot of questions because if you look, and I love, this is a wonderful picture, but if you think about it now, many of us, a lot of us have phones. I think most of us have cell phones now. And every one of those cell phones has an IP address, an Internet Protocol address. And it can be secure, but it can be insecure. But the great thing about this is that one can track things here if one is doing this appropriately, and this is the big if in terms of ethics. But, for instance, in a hurricane in Haiti, you can track IP addresses and see where people are collecting. So you can move the tents, the healthcare tents, to them, rather than just setting something up and expecting people to know where it is on a big island. You can maybe also see who is interacting with who, what IP address is bouncing up against what other IP address, just like where you're touring on the Internet can tell something about you. That also could be promising. The trouble is, I think if we are what we do, which I think we are, we're the sum of our actions, then we probably want to know about this ourselves. The thing is, we have to take control of this information, and this is going to require more of a philosophical and legal discussion than a medical one. But it's beyond all of this, and it's this. This is one of my favorite guys. This is Hobbes. But you know his buddies Hume and Locke and Rousseau and all those social contract theorists. They said that we would make a contract with a government so that we wouldn't live a life in a state of nature, nasty, brutish, and short. And I think for us, we have to figure out how to take control of this new information so that our lives are longer and better. But it's us, I think, that is going to have to do this, not some evil entity looking down upon us. And this is going to be very important because it's going to kind of be something of a declaration of health independence as these data become available. So with that, the last three sections we're going to talk about just briefly are these, and then a couple other things, and then we're going to close. So later in life, can we be more independent? Can we be out of the hospital and in the home? And I think we can. And when I think of times at home, out of the hospital, like you, I think of tattoos. And I don't. My 3 daughters are here. No way. Are you kidding? But the thing is, maybe if they're medical, you can get a tattoo, honey. But this is another very exciting time because these are things that you can see. There's some that you can't, they can be made invisible or however you want, but they can measure a lot of things now. Anything from something as simple as temperature to specific chemicals, to actually looking at pressure and contractility. But these are things that can then be pinged by a cell phone or a wireless network and then sent to a nurse or to a doctor or to ourselves to give us more information. And this is sort of this whole area of sort of super skins, and these things can be powered by stretchable. There's very interesting work going on There's some work going on here with some of the tattoos and sensors, but in Stanford as well, and stretchable solar cells that you can put on fabric that could then, by induction, power some of these things. It's pretty nifty. But with that, this is the next point. Can we take someone and put them home and make prevention pay? Because the problem with what we do in medicine is that people get, it's like widgets, and there's proceduralism, and that stinks. And it would be nice if we could move away from that and actually focus on this, sort of prevention and remission, if you will. And the data look really good if we can create an economic model around it. And that's one of the big deals. These are the most conservative numbers we have, and they change all the time. There's big standard deviations, but you can see you don't need, there's an order of, these are order of magnitudes different. With a basic hospital stay per month here, that's very inexpensive. That's like a bargain friggin' basement Walmart kind of situation. Target would probably be $47,000. If you got up to Neiman Marcus, forget it. But then in-home care is much less expensive, and then far less for monitoring, intensive monitoring by telehealth and telemedicine, which really is quite interesting, and I think the data consistently really work in this area. But I think that for us, that we have no problem collectively paying a little bit of money to feel safe in our home. We pay the Brinks Home Security or whatever it is to feel safe in our home. I think maybe ultimately we may pay money, and maybe it's our insurance company, but I have faith in us before the insurance company. Maybe we'll pay a little bit of money to feel safe in our body, and maybe a subscription to some of this that will be monitoring things so that we feel safe and we can be a little bit more independent. Maybe. We do it for Hulu and Netflix and our cable. Maybe here. I don't know, and I might be wrong, but it would be nice because we could move into an era of prevention instead of just paying for widgets everywhere. And maybe this can redefine the house call. I used to go on house calls with my dad and with my pop when I was little, and maybe this is the way you do it, just by pinging someone now and going from there. So now, as we move to close, we're going to kind of see how we can make a cyber person from gadgets that we have today, kind of off the shelf, if you will, and then we'll close. We already have all of these things that make us different. They make us maybe better, glasses, a cochlear implant, different kinds of things. But I think we have to start asking us, and you're going to hear this from Paul Cohen at the last talk, which is going to be another tour de force talk after tour de force talk from Vinny Del Casino. But it's this. I think it's, what is it that makes us us, and when are we not us? I mean, this is profound. And I think we, as we age, are at the forefront of all this business. So, but our gadgets, we're becoming more and more sort of irrationally emotionally, if you will, attached to these things. There's like objects of art now. And I asked a couple of our fellows last week, I asked this question, what would you rather have? One kidney removed or lose your phone? And I swear to you. And more than half of them said, so this is my sample size here, more than half of them said that they'd rather lose a kidney and a redundant organ, if you will. So this is where it's going. But the thing is that these are things now that we have on us, and they're like an organ. We don't have to think about it. Here's an example. This is the operating room. This is an operating room in Los Angeles, and this is one of my former fellows. He's actually running for Congress now. He's never going to win because no, he's very bright, full of vim and vigor, but these glasses look too European, I think. It's not. Actually, he has some very good people that are working with him. I think they've already changed the glasses, and they've given him a congressperson's haircut. But anyway, he was in a case, and it was a very bad case of a flesh-eating bacteria, and I was literally at my partner, I call him my non-life partner, Joe Mills, who's a vascular surgeon. I was at his house, and we were having dinner together, and he just didn't even think. He just pressed the button on his iPhone, and we FaceTimed in the operating room, and this was a couple of years ago, and there's Wi-Fi in the OR just like everywhere else, and of course in Joe's house, and so we're sitting there, and we're working on this case together, and the circulator, she's holding this there, and we're going through this case. And he didn't have to think about it. And it turned out that this was the first surgery ever done, or at least surgery that was ever documented by FaceTime, by, if you will, and in the literature by phone. And that was published now in the plastic surgery literature. But the point is that these things are getting very, they're part of us in a way, for some of us, and I think for more and more people later. But the thing is, how does this actually maybe merge with us? Why do they have to be separate? So already the big ticket item of last year, I don't know how many jillions of these have sold, has been this iPhone with Siri on it, iPhone 4S. And look at these, all these really happy kind of Stepford people, kind of all talking in to this thing. And you know what I mean, don't you? It freaks you out a little bit. Everyone's smiling. You wonder what's going on. Because this thing doesn't work very often. But the point is that we can, but the point is that it is great when it works. And we can very clearly, natural language is getting better and better in terms of our ability to talk on the phone. But so that's one of our input devices that we're going to collect and kind of put together. What's one of the others? How about a monitor? But instead of a monitor, let's put it in our eye. And this is from Buddy Ratner, who developed some of the first contact lenses at the University of Washington. He's a great bioengineer. And this is an antenna on a contact lens with an LED device that beams right to your back of your eyeball. And this is a integrated chip right here. And so this thing is like a monitor. And it can be done wirelessly. And I can imagine one day we're buying our contact lenses not at Lens Crafters, but at friggin' Best Buy. But no, think about this. And it's very feasible. These are now a couple of few years old, but what about this? So we have our eyeball going. We can talk to things a bit now. But what about our memories? And that wonderful lecture last week from Carol Barnes, making us think about who we are and how we're made of our memories, got me thinking about this. I actually bought one. And this is one of the hot tickets from late last year during the holiday season. This is called a look-see device. And this is just like one of those goofy Bluetooth headsets. But this is even goofier. Tanya, my wife, and girls, they wouldn't even look at me when I put this on. For like a day, they were like, oh, Dad. But this actually films everything you're doing, everything you're looking at. It's ridiculous, actually. But in other ways, it's very exciting. And so look, here's some fella. He's kind of just walking down the street, just sort of doing his thing. And right here got this thing on, and looking around. A little bit dull, actually, if you think talking. But look, oh, I wonder what was on that bus. Maybe I will rewind it later and look. Because I have hours and hours of my life, maybe my whole life, on something like this. And so it starts making you think about, again, what makes us us. And in terms of sort of memory engineering, if we are sort of the sum, if we will, of our memories, what if our memories were never summarized, if you will? I'm not doing a good job of articulating this. I'm sort of disarticulating it. But I think you see what I'm getting at. Paul Cohen, I guarantee you, can articulate this a lot better. Stay tuned. But this is very exciting to me just to think about. And it's a little, but instead of walking down like a lane of memory lane, we'd walk with a superhighway of memory. But is that really, I mean, do we really want that? I mean, sometimes we want imperfect memories. So it's, I mean, right? And so we have to think about this as we move forward with all of this business. And then we're going to be looking at it all through our contact lens and our eyeball, and there we go. So then the last bit here is can we put this all together, and can we move something with our head without actually doing anything else other than thinking about it? And this is called machine augmented. There's various terms, but ultimately when we're thinking about it, it may be a machine augmented cognition. But actually now this is work done again at University of Washington and outside of Tokyo. You can do a fMRI, and then you can then put a sensor on here and then amplify that signal and then basically move a cursor and play Pong. And didn't you love Pong? I bought it at Sears. Does Sears exist anymore? But Montgomery Wards. But you see what's happening here. This is, to me, astonishing. So that's the first bit of this. But then, what if we can take what you saw earlier, someone who perhaps is a paraplegic or even a quadriplegic, and cut the cord? Now, you can work on regenerating the spinal cord, but even while you're doing that, maybe we can work on movement and giving someone some normalcy in their life. So this is from the University of Pittsburgh, UPMC, and this is a fella that is a quadriplegic. But you can see here he's had an fMRI, he's had a brain scan, and then he's had implanted, just very superficially, a sensor which then amplifies a signal through the beanie. The beanie, this is a very expensive beanie, then can communicate either by wires or even ultimately wireless to that. And then, and so this is called the BCI, or brain-computer interface. And this is a really hot area right now, and one can maybe bypass a spinal cord. And look at this. I mean, this is really wild, that this is being moved by thought. And there's no nerves, at least none that we think of in the afferent or efferent sort of thing. And he's got kind of the Michael Phelps kind of swim cap thing going, but he's just thinking. And so then the next question here is, why does this hand have to just be here in front of his face? Why can't it be further away, like a long way away? And that kind of brings us to maybe the last thing we'll talk about before we conclude, and that's like real, like avatars, if you will. This sounds super geeky, and I will admit it is. But look at this. And if I think geek, I think, let's go to Japan. So this is from Keio University, and this is a creepy-looking robot. But the robot is being controlled entirely by a person in the same room. I know it's hard for you to see, so you're going to have to work with me here. But he's moving, using very delicate motions, these hands, and these fingers have haptic sensors on them and thermal sensors on them, and you can actually interact with things. It's extraordinary that you can do this. So imagine now, as this gets smaller and better, and I have a number of friends of mine are working very hard on upper extremity works here as well as this. Imagine now you ultimately interacting with a family member 1,000 miles away through basically like a doll in their room. And that doll is a representation of you. It sounds ridiculous, I will admit, but imagine if that's possible. It is possible. I guess we would have thought that a phone call or a video conference was impossible just a few years ago, or we thought that was highly impersonal. Maybe this is something that may show some promise for all of us at one point in the future. Maybe not. But it's interesting to sort of prognosticate, as it were. So let's kind of move to our conclusion, ladies and gentlemen. And you've been fabulous, by the way. But again, we'll sort of end where we started. And with knowledge. With knowledge, brilliance, perspective. All right? And I mean, it's hard to beat this. When I think of him, actually, I not only think of Oscar Wilde, like in the beginning, but again, like you, I think of Blaise Pascal. And Pascal, another brilliant character, by the way, with the hair, too. He said quite a long time ago, he has such a wonderful quote, it's one of my favorite quotes. He talked about knowledge, and he said, knowledge is like a sphere. The greater its volume, the larger its contact with the unknown. Now, think about that. It's like the expanding universe. It's like inflation. And we have these galaxies of knowledge in medicine and engineering and biology and science and chemistry and all these things expanding, flying away from each other. Like, you know, whatever metaphor you want to use or simile, like these, and they're all so important, and there's so many great things happening. But the thing that binds them together, the things that binds them together are the ideas and the perspective, and that takes energy. It's like dark energy in the universe. It's harder to see, but probably more massive and more important. And I think that is what accelerates change. It's pulling things from weird places and patching it together. And a battery in a heart, or something along those lines. Yarn in an artificial muscle. These weird connections that ultimately can make a big difference. And that then leads us sort of to fight entropy. It takes a lot of that energy. But this, if there ever was sort of a grand unifying theory, and I know there's been a lot of hagiographies sort of around Steve Jobs, making him like a saint, and he was in many ways a guiding light in technology, but I will give him that this is an astonishingly effective slide, maybe the most effective one I've ever seen, where he talks about the intersection in the street sign of technology and the humanities. And that is what guys like Dean Ruiz put this thing together for. And I think ultimately we should thank him for that. But what I'll also tell you is that if we take his advice and we marry the technology with a little bit of humanity, not so much hubris, and some humility, I think where we're going, I don't know where we're going, but I think it's not going to be easy, and it will be hard, but I don't think it's going to be some Malthusian, post-apocalyptic, Mad Max kind of thing either. I think I'm excited about where we're headed, and I think ultimately putting these things together really is a grand unifying theory and can make a difference for all of us. That's whether we live to 100 or beyond. And with that, I thank you so much. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
May I say, I know you're not my Valentine, but you look even prettier in person.
Well, a couple of questions for David.
How about out here?
I'm sorry. Is that you, oh Lord? No, I'm sorry, I don't.
Hello?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, yes, ma'am, yes.
Are the adult stem cells living up to expectations versus the embryonic?
It's a superb question. By the way, Horacio, feel free to come out if you finish with the Red Bull. But the answer is it depends. I think there are places where some advances have come. I think there are data in certain areas of wound healing that are early days, because that's the matrix that we can see. It's right out in front of us, like you saw. I think there are some victories there. You saw early victories in cardiovascular medicine. We are now doing a study right now in our unit in Salsa. It's being headed up by my partner, Joe Mills, who's a vascular surgeon, where we are taking stem cells, adult stem cells, and we are injecting them along the path of the trifurcation of vessels below the knee, the 3 big vessels below the knee for people with bad blood flow into their legs. And what we're trying to create is a network of blood vessels to make an auto bypass, if you will. And that, there's data for and against that right now. I think that we are marching from matrix to matrix with stem cells, adult stem cells initially, and I think it's early days, but I think there's some element of optimism. There's also a lot of smoke and mirrors as well, and just a lot of baloney. But it is exciting. I will tell you that it captures the imagination. Great question.
I have one over here.
Where are we? Oh, there we are. Oh, yeah. Yes, sir. Ma'am.
The number of us that are getting to the age for knee and hip replacements, et cetera, I keep wondering why we can't use the matrix that you're using for skin to replace cartilage, because in some cases it's just a cartilage issue, it isn't a bone issue.
Right. This is another great question. Now, there is work actually the Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons is going on, I think, right around now. There's a lot of work going on in orthopedic surgery in looking at cartilage and cartilage mechanics. I mean, it's been going on since I was training, actually. There are a lot of real pioneers in that area that are trying to grow high-quality hyaline and fibrocartilage and resurface things. They still don't behave as well with a great deal of degeneration as artificial hips and knees. I mean, there are, I think, like 600,000 artificial knees every year put in the United States every year, from numbers I've last heard from my friends in ortho.
Can I comment on some of this?
Absolutely.
So I think that there is a switch on the paradigm of thinking, because we always think that putting new cells are going to replace what is wrong. And what happened is when you look for those cells that you transplanted, and there are ways to tag those cells with fluorescent proteins that are obtained from jellyfish, so you know that those cells are no longer there, or other techniques. Basically what happened is we realized that the cells that were yours initially are regenerating. So what the cells and matrix that you have transplanted are stimulating the regeneration of your own cells, and that's basically what's a new light in the thinking of what to do with old tissues, you know. So what is tremendously complex to try to summarize it in 2 seconds, but you can do it through the delivery, local delivery of growth factors, and of course, you know, it's out of the scope of David's presentation, but you could potentially embed nanoparticles with drugs and growth factors within those weave fibers and stimulate regeneration.
To that end, I think there's a lot going on, and this is such a great question, and we could spend a whole. There's a lot going on in different delivery systems for things. In your perspective on saying, wow, that knee, that rent, or that in the cartilage, or that denuded cartilage looks just like a wound to me, which is what you're really saying is absolutely right. And I think it is a wound. We just have to figure out how to stimulate that.
And the last one right there.
Someone sent me a video via computer showing something called a skin gun, and it was used on burns.
Right.
And it seemed miraculous with the speed of the briefness of time required to heal the skin.
So absolutely. So the skin gun is a technology that started in Australia, and we're very familiar with the technology. But what it does is you can take someone's own cells. These are epidermal cells. Now, these are in people that are otherwise generally healthy, thank God, but they've had burns. And then one can prepare the wound bed, in a patient in a burn, and then one takes those cells. They can amplify the cells, grow some more, as it were, and then actually the spray is merely a means of delivery over a wider surface area that is made healthy. It is really cool. It's a really, if you will, delivery system. And I think we're going to see more things like that in surgery, where we can aerosolize things. However, there are a lot of other really nifty ways to expand skin now as well. We're working now with, we just got a device from friends of ours at Brigham and Women's in Boston, where we can take skin from the epidermal cells from the thigh and then pull it. It's just like suction cups, like medieval times, where we can take a suction cup and take an epidermal graft, which heals imperceptibly on the thigh, and actually then with a little cheese grater, after you pull things up through an area, we can actually grate that and then take those little particles of skin, orient them on a dressing, and then you don't even need to do the dressing. You just take the dressing and then you stick that onto a wound. And you can plex that out over a large area. That's pretty nifty too. And we're playing with that in a week and a half. So that's another kinds of thing. But what you're talking about is very real. That gun works well for burns. For other complicated wounds, it may not work quite as well. Great question.
Well, thank you very much, Dave, for a fantastic talk, and thank you all.